I had just finished a work trip on the offshore oil rig, eager to visit my frail grandmother. But the house was empty, not a soul in sight. The neighbor, trembling, said, "Your grandmother had a stroke. She's in the ICU." And my parents? They were nowhere to be found. When I discovered the receipts for a European vacation tucked away in a drawer, the harsh truth hit me. The money I sent to care for her had been used for their enjoyment. But what they didn't expect, and what even I didn't know, was that my grandmother had been a secret millionaire all these years. Hello, my name is Austin Price, 32 years old, a mechanical engineer working on oil rigs off the Gulf of Mexico. My job is far from easy. Long days at sea amid the roar of machinery and scorching sun. I cling to every moment to keep my mind sharp. Each shift stretches for weeks, sometimes a month, trapping me in a world of steel, oil, and gruff colleagues. But in return, the pay is generous, over $90,000 a year, enough for me to live comfortably in a small apartment near downtown Houston, Texas. The apartment isn't anything special. It's just a place to crash after rushed flights from the airport to home and back to the rig. It's convenient, close to the airport, and that's all I need. But if you ask me what truly keeps me grounded, what keeps me from being swept away by the stormy waves of this life, it's my grandmother, Lois Price. She's my lighthouse, the resilient woman who taught me how to live with kindness, how to stand tall no matter how fiercely life's winds blow. At 78, my grandmother is frail now, her legs trembling, her hands too weak to hold a spoon. But to me, she's still the woman who single-handedly ran small businesses, from market stalls to truckloads of goods, to support our family through the toughest times. She was the one who pulled me out of a chaotic childhood when my parents were too busy chasing their own pleasures. She lives in Beaumont, a small city about an hour and a half's drive from Houston. That's also where my parents, Fred and Carol Price, live, in the old house my grandmother bought decades ago. My father, 58, works as an administrative clerk for a local logistics company. His job is stable, but his income only just covers his penchant for indulgence. My father is the type who loves to show off, from a new watch to exaggerated stories about connections with people no one can verify exist. Every time we meet, he talks about grand plans, but I know he's just posturing, wanting others to think he has it all. My mother, Carol, 55, is gentler but no less caught up in vanity. She works as a sales clerk in a clothing store, where she can spend hours talking about the latest dresses or the designer handbags she dreams of owning. She's not as strong as my grandmother, but she has a way of making others feel guilty if they don't follow her wishes. I vividly remember when I suggested moving my grandmother to a reputable nursing home in Houston, where she could receive top-notch medical care. My mother looked at me with teary eyes and said, "Old people need to stay with family, Austin. You can't just send her away like that." Her words sounded heartfelt, but looking back, I sensed something insincere in them. The conflict began one weekend evening when I drove from Houston to Beaumont to visit my grandmother. Sitting in the cramped living room of the old house, I tried to convince my parents to consider moving her to a reputable nursing home in Houston. I had done my research. It was a place with dedicated doctors, experienced nurses, and modern amenities to ensure that my grandmother, the woman I loved most, could live comfortably and safely in her final years. I spoke to my parents, my voice full of hope. I think she deserves better care. In a nursing home, she'd have someone monitoring her health every day, no worries at all. My father, sitting in an old armchair, a beer in hand, cut me off. He raised an eyebrow, his tone firm with a hint of mockery. "Austin, you think we can't take care of her? Our family can handle it. No need for a nursing home. Just keep sending the money regularly, that's enough." He emphasized enough, as if I were an ungrateful son daring to question the family's capabilities. I looked into his eyes and saw that familiar glint of self-satisfaction. My father was always like that, loving to control everything, boasting that he was the family's pillar, even though I knew his logistics job barely covered his taste for expensive liquor or showing off to friends. My mother, Carol, sitting nearby, was scrolling through her phone looking at new dresses. She glanced up, her eyes briefly worried before shifting to a feigned gentleness. "Austin, honey," she said, her voice soft but somehow theatrical. "Old people need to be with family, not in some place full of strangers. Your father and I are here taking care of her every day. You don't need to worry." She paused, placing a hand on my shoulder as if to soothe me. "Family is what matters most, you understand, don't you?" Her words sounded warm, but I couldn't help noticing the way she glanced at my father, as if they'd already agreed to oppose me. I sat there, caught between my parents, feeling like I was trapped in a play where I wasn't the lead. I wanted to argue, to say that my grandmother needed more than empty promises, that her health was deteriorating, that she needed doctors, not makeshift meals or hastily bought pills. But I couldn't speak. I loved her, and I believed, or wanted to believe, that my parents who were with her every day would care for her properly. "All right," I sighed, nodding. "I'll send money every month, but you have to promise to take good care of her, okay?" My father smirked, clapping me on the shoulder as if I'd just signed a deal in his favor. "Don't worry, son. We know what we're doing." So I agreed, sending a substantial sum each month, enough to hire a private nurse, buy quality medication, or even improve the house to make her life more comfortable. I thought that as long as she was well cared for, I could focus on my long work trips offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. But deep down, there was a nagging feeling, as if I had just entrusted my most precious treasure to people who didn't truly value it. Each time I returned from the rig, I made time to visit her. Those brief visits were my lifeline. I remember the afternoon sitting with her, listening to her stories of the past. How, as a young woman, she hustled through markets, selling vegetables and fish to keep the family afloat. She told these stories with a gentle smile, but her eyes always carried an indescribable sadness, as if she knew something I hadn't yet heard. "Austin," she'd often say, "live so you have no regrets. Don't let life carry you too far away." I nodded, thinking she was just reminding me to balance work and family. I didn't realize her words held a much deeper meaning. Houston, with its fast-paced life and towering skyscrapers, was the place I called home. But Beaumont was where my heart belonged. My grandmother's old house, with its faded tile roof and porch full of wildflowers, was where I found peace. Each drive from Houston to Beaumont felt like entering a different world, slower, more intimate, as if time moved more gently there. But this time, my return wasn't filled with those warm moments. It had become a nightmare. 3 weeks earlier, I was adrift on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico, feeling trapped in an iron cage amidst the ocean. The roar of drilling machines, the pungent smell of oil, and the relentless waves crashing against the rig's supports made me long to escape, to return to land where my grandmother, the only person who made me feel I truly had a home, was waiting. Luckily, this time my shift ended early due to a technical glitch. I nearly cheered when I was allowed to leave the rig ahead of schedule, my heart swelling with excitement at the thought of hugging my grandmother, hearing her recount old stories about her days hustling through markets to support the family. I pictured her sitting in her armchair, her gentle smile glowing under the warm light of a lamp, the faint aroma of freshly baked cookies in the air. "Grandma, I'm back," I murmured, a smile spreading across my face as the plane touched down at Houston's airport. I decided not to call ahead, wanting to surprise her. My car cruised along I-10, passing fields stretching under a blazing red sunset. But as I approached Beaumont, a strange unease began to creep in. I couldn't explain it. It was as if an invisible thread was tightening around my chest. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the road, but my mind was a whirlwind. Why did I feel so anxious this time? I told myself it was just exhaustion from the work trip, but the bad feeling grew, like a dark cloud rolling in. As I turned onto the street leading to my parents' house, the sunset cast a glow over the faded tile roof, but it no longer felt warm like it did in my memories. I stepped out of the car, my heart pounding, and pushed open the door. The house was eerily silent. No lights, no sound of the TV. Not even the soft cough of my grandmother or the rustle of pages from the books she loved to read. "Grandma? Dad? Mom?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space, but only silence answered. I rushed from the living room to the kitchen, then to my grandmother's bedroom. Her bed was empty, the blankets neatly folded as if untouched. A chill ran down my spine. "Where is she?" I muttered, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone to call my mother. One ring, two rings, then nothing but a long, hollow beep. I tried my father, still no answer. My heart felt like it would explode, panic squeezing every breath. I bolted outside, nearly breaking down the door of Mrs. Hattie's house, the neighbor who'd been close to our family since I was a child. The door swung open, and there stood Mrs. Hattie, her wrinkled face etched with worry, her eyes red as if she'd cried them dry. "Austin, oh my God, you're back," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. Her frail hands clutched mine like they were grasping at straws. "Your grandmother, she had a stroke. It's been 5 days. She's in the ICU at Beaumont Memorial." My entire body froze. I stood there, ears ringing, each word like a blade piercing my heart. 5 days? ICU? The ground beneath me seemed to give way as if the world was crumbling. A stroke? 5 days? Why didn't anyone tell me? I shouted, my voice breaking, barely recognizable. My throat tightened, my breathing ragged, tears blurring my vision. Mrs. Hattie gripped my hand tighter, shaking her head. "Your parents. They took her to the hospital, then disappeared a few days ago. I'm sorry, Austin. I didn't know what else to do." Her words were the final blow. I reeled, a mix of rage and pain so intense it felt like my chest might burst. In that moment, I had only one thought. I had to get to her. As my car screeched into the hospital parking lot, I practically leapt out, my legs trembling but propelling me toward the entrance. The long hallway with its cold white lights and the sharp smell of antiseptic choked me. I ran, frantically asking, "ICU, my grandmother, Lois Price." A nurse pointed down the hall, her voice soft but firm. "Room 12, 3rd floor. But you need to prepare yourself." I barely heard the last part. The elevator felt agonizingly slow. When the doors opened, I rushed out, my heart pounding like a hammer in my chest. Outside the ICU room, my hands shook, hesitating to push the door open. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, and then my world shattered again. My grandmother, the strong woman whose eyes always lit up when she saw me, lay motionless on the bed, her small frame buried under white blankets. Tubes crisscrossed her body, the steady beeping of the heart monitor blending with the rhythmic hiss of the mechanical ventilator. Her face was swollen, bruised purple, her eyes closed, her once kind features now pale, barely recognizable. "Grandma." I choked, tears streaming down, hot and stinging. I stepped forward, grasping her frail, cold hand, forcing a smile even as my heart broke. Nurse Miranda Lopez, a young woman with gentle but indignant eyes, approached me. "You're Austin, Lois's grandson, right?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. I nodded, unable to take my eyes off my grandmother. Miranda sighed as if holding back anger. "She was brought in 5 days ago in critical condition. Your parents, they signed the admission papers and left right after. They haven't come back to visit. We tried contacting them, but no response." I looked up at her, feeling like someone had stabbed me in the chest. "Left? What do you mean they left? They abandoned her here alone?" My voice trembled, a mix of pain and fury. Miranda nodded, her eyes filled with compassion, but also unmistakable disappointment. "I'm sorry, Austin. I've never seen family act like this." I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm, but my chest felt crushed. "How is she? Can you tell me, please?" I asked, my voice faltering, almost pleading. Miranda looked at me, her gaze softening, but her words were heavy, carefully chosen. "Lois had a severe stroke, Austin. When she was brought in, her blood pressure was dangerously high and a significant part of her brain was badly damaged. We've stabilized her condition as best we can, but... She paused, glancing at my grandmother lying motionless. She hasn't woken up. The ventilator is keeping her breathing, and we're monitoring her closely, but the prognosis isn't good. She must have been so lonely without her family here these past days. The ground seemed to collapse beneath me. Lonely? I repeated, my voice breaking, the word tearing my heart apart. You mean she's been here for 5 days with no one by her side, no one caring for her except you all? Miranda nodded faintly, her eyes brimming with sorrow. We've done everything we can, Austin. But elderly people need their family. They need a hand to hold, a familiar voice. I don't know where your parents went, but she needs you now. I sank to my knees beside the bed, tears streaming down hot against her hand. Grandma, it's me. I whispered, my voice breaking. I'm sorry I came too late. I should have been here from the start. The image of my grandmother, the woman who held me when I cried, who taught me to stand up after every fall, lying here frail and alone, overwhelmed me. My parents, the people I trusted, had abandoned her. What had they done with the money I sent? Where were they when she needed them most? Rage flared, but it was quickly drowned by heart-wrenching pain. I felt like a failure, an unworthy grandson who let her suffer alone. I pulled a chair close to the bed, gripping her hand tightly, and vowed to myself, Grandma, I'm here now. I'll stay with you. I'll find out the truth. The beeping of the machines blended with my heartbeat, each sound a reminder that her time was slipping away. But I couldn't let her be alone. Never again. Deep inside, a cold suspicion stirred, as if something dark was waiting to be uncovered. I looked at her, and a fierce determination ignited. No matter what happened, I would protect her, and I would not let the truth stay buried in the shadows. The next day at the hospital, Nurse Miranda Lopez passed by a few times, checking the machines and making notes. Her eyes were filled with compassion, but I could tell she was also holding back disappointment about my parents. You should rest a bit, she said gently, but I just shook my head. Rest? How could I rest when my grandmother was fighting on the edge of life and death? And my parents, the people I trusted most, had vanished without explanation? But then I realized my grandmother needed a few things to feel more comfortable. The wool blanket she loved, the small Bible she read every night, and some clean clothes, small things that could bring a bit of warmth to her in this cold hospital room. I'll go get your things, Grandma, I whispered, kissing her gently on the forehead, where her thin silver hair fell loosely. I'll be right back. Driving back to my parents' house, my mind was a storm. Questions swirled relentlessly, tormenting me. Where were my parents? Why weren't they here when she needed them most? What had they done with the money I sent every month, the money I earned through sweat and toil on the oil rig? I tried to push away the bad feelings, telling myself they might just be busy, that there could be a reasonable explanation. But deep down, a small voice whispered that I was wrong, that I had misplaced my trust. The house was still as empty as when I'd left it. The sunset's light filtered through the windows, illuminating the worn-out furniture in the living room. My father's frayed armchair, my mother's dusty bookshelf, and a family photo hanging crookedly on the wall. A photo that now felt utterly false. I went to my grandmother's room, picking up her favorite green wool blanket, still faintly scented with the lavender perfume she used. Her Bible sat on the small bedside table, its pages yellowed with time. I clutched these items to my chest, feeling like I was holding on to a piece of her, a piece of the most cherished memories of my life. But I still needed to find a few more things, her medication list, or at least some clean clothes. I opened the dining room drawer where my mother usually kept important documents, hoping to find something useful. What I found instead stopped me cold. Neatly stacked in the drawer were brochures advertising European tour packages. Next to them was a thick stack of receipts. Charges for a $3,500 Louis Vuitton bag, a case of imported Bordeaux wine costing over $2,000, and a gleaming Rolex watch with a price tag of $12,000. All paid for with my father's credit card. My hands trembled as I held those papers as if grasping evidence of a heinous crime. Tens of thousands of dollars, the money I sent every month, the money I believed would pay for nurses, good medication, or improvements to make her life more comfortable, had been squandered by my parents on lavish vacations and meaningless luxury items. I sank into a chair, still clutching the receipts, feeling betrayed by my own flesh and blood. My heart pounded as if it might explode. "How could you do this?" I muttered, my voice choking, tears streaming uncontrollably. I pictured my grandmother lying alone in the hospital, no one to hold her hand, no one to comfort her, while my parents were likely sipping wine under the lights of Paris, laughing as if she didn't exist. The shock hit me like a knife through the heart, but it quickly turned into a burning rage. I gripped the receipts, crumpling them in my hands. They had taken my money, her money, to live a life of extravagance, abandoning my grandmother, the woman who had sacrificed her entire life for this family when she needed them most. I remembered my father's voice, the way he smirked when I suggested a nursing home. "Our family can handle it, Austin. Just keep sending the money, that's enough." And my mother, with her feigned, gentle eyes, "Old people need to be with family, honey." Those words echoed in my head now, mocking me. They didn't want her in a nursing home, not out of love, but because the money I sent was funding their selfish desires. I felt like a fool, an unworthy grandson who had trusted the wrong people, who had let my grandmother suffer alone. I stood up, shoving the receipts into my jacket pocket, determined to confront my parents. But first, I had to return to the hospital. My grandmother needed me more than ever. I drove back to Beaumont Memorial, my mind a tangled mess of anger and pain. When I entered the ICU, I sat down, took her hand, and whispered, "Grandma, I'm sorry. I left you alone for too long." My tears fell onto the back of her hand, mingling with her aged wrinkles. I didn't know if she could hear me, but I knew I couldn't let her be alone for even a second longer. I would stay here, and I would do whatever it took to protect her, no matter the cost. I stayed by her side, never leaving. The days that followed passed in an endless loop. The beeping of machines, the soft footsteps of nurses, and the nightmares in my head about my parents' betrayal. I took care of everything for her myself, from wiping her down with a warm cloth to ensuring she was fed through the tube, even if it was just drips of liquid nutrition. I paid the hospital bills with my own savings, no longer relying on anyone else. Every time I looked at the hospital invoices, I thought of the extravagant receipts in my parents' drawer, the Louis Vuitton bag, the Bordeaux wine, the Rolex watch. Anger flared up again, but I suppressed it because right now she needed me more than ever. Nurse Miranda Lopez became my reluctant companion during those days. She checked on my grandmother regularly, sometimes pausing to talk. "You're truly a good grandson, Austin," she said one morning as I folded my grandmother's favorite green woolen blanket. "Mrs. Lois is lucky to have you." I gave a faint smile, not responding. Lucky? If I were truly a good grandson, I wouldn't have let her end up in this situation. I wouldn't have trusted my parents blindly, leaving her alone here for 5 days. "Do you think she'll wake up?" I asked, my voice small, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. Miranda looked at me, her eyes gentle but tinged with worry. "We're doing everything we can, but she's elderly, and the brain damage is severe. Stay here. Talk to her. Sometimes a loved one's voice can work miracles." I nodded, gripping my grandmother's hand tightly, and began recounting old stories about the time she took me to the market, how she taught me to tie my shoelaces, her smile when I brought home my engineering degree. I didn't know if she could hear me, but I hoped, even if it was just a faint glimmer of hope, that my voice could pull her back. The days passed, and I lived in a small world that contained only her and me. I dozed off in the hospital chair, ate hurried sandwiches from the cafeteria, and ignored every call from colleagues on the rig. Work, money, life in Houston, all of it became meaningless. Each morning I woke up hoping to see her eyes open, but with every passing day that hope faded. On the third day, Dr. Paul Carter, who was overseeing her case, came to check on her. He was a middle-aged man with a calm, steady voice, but his eyes couldn't hide the gravity of the situation. "We've done everything we can, Austin," he said, holding the chart. "Her condition is slightly more stable, but the brain damage remains severe. The chances of her waking up, they're not high. You should prepare yourself." I nodded, but my heart felt crushed under a heavy weight. Prepare myself? How could I prepare to lose the woman who had given me my entire childhood? On the night of the fourth day, I sat by her side, reading aloud her favorite Bible passages. My voice was hoarse, but I didn't stop. "Grandma, I know you're strong," I said, holding her hand tightly. "You've overcome so many hardships. You can do this, right?" I studied her face, searching for any sign, even the smallest blink. But she lay there, motionless, as if in a place I couldn't reach. I bowed my head, pressing my forehead to her hand, and cried. "I'm sorry, Grandma," I whispered. "I should have been here from the start. I should have protected you." On the morning of the fifth day, a miracle happened. I was dozing by her bed, exhausted after a sleepless night, when I felt a faint squeeze from her hand. I jolted upright, my heart pounding. Her eyes, those kind eyes I thought would never open again, slowly fluttered. "Grandma, Grandma?" I called, my voice trembling, hardly believing my own eyes. She looked at me, her gaze weak but conscious. "Austin," she whispered, her voice so hoarse it was barely audible. I burst into tears, the floodgates breaking open. "Grandma, I'm here, I'm here." I held her hand to my cheek, feeling as though the entire world had been lit up again. She was alive. She was back. And in that moment, I knew she still had a chance to speak the truth. The truth about what had happened, about what my parents had done, and perhaps about the secrets she had kept hidden for so many years. I called for the nurse, and Miranda rushed into the room, her eyes lighting up when she saw my grandmother awake. "Oh my God, she's awake!" she exclaimed, quickly checking the monitors. Dr. Carter was called in shortly after, and he gave a rare smile. "This is a miracle, Austin," he said, "but she's still very weak. We need to keep monitoring her." I nodded, my eyes never leaving her. I didn't care how weak she was. As long as she was alive, looking at me, calling my name, that was enough. I sat by her side, holding her hand tightly, and whispered, "Grandma, I won't let you go anywhere. I promise." But deep down, the receipts in my jacket pocket felt like they were burning. The truth about my parents, about the misused money, still loomed like a dark shadow. I knew that her waking up wasn't just a beacon of hope for me. It was also an opportunity to uncover everything, to ensure justice was served, and to make those who betrayed her pay the price. In the days after my grandmother woke up, I lived in a strange state, half relieved, half tense. She was still weak, her voice hoarse, only able to say a few words before exhaustion took over. But every time she held my hand, however weakly, I felt as if I was given a surge of strength. I stayed at the hospital from morning till late at night, taking care of her every little need, wiping her face, reading the Bible, recounting old stories to pull her out of the dark shadow of her days in a coma. Nurse Miranda Lopez and Dr. Paul Carter became silent witnesses to my devotion. "You're doing great, Austin," Miranda said. I only nodded, not responding. "Great?" I wasn't sure. My grandmother looked at me, her eyes growing a little brighter each day, but there was still a deep sadness in them that I couldn't understand. "Austin, you're so good," she whispered one afternoon, her voice so faint I had to lean in close to hear. I smiled, holding her hand tightly. "You're the best, Grandma. I won't let you suffer anymore." But deep down I knew the story wasn't over. I hadn't told her what I had discovered, about my parents, about the money they misused. I didn't want to break her heart, didn't want to reveal the truth while she was still so fragile. But I knew sooner or later the truth would have to come to light. On the morning of the third day after she woke up, I was sitting by her bed reading a passage from the Bible when the ICU door swung open. I looked up and my heart seemed to stop. My parents walked in, looking radiant as if they had just returned from a dream vacation. My mother, in a sparkling new dress, her wrist adorned with a shiny gold bracelet, smiled brightly. My father, in an expensive dress shirt and with a smug smile, patted my shoulder as if we were old friends reuniting. "Austin, my boy. I heard Grandma woke up. I'm so glad," my mother said, her voice so sweet it felt artificial. My father nodded, adding, "Yeah, we came as soon as we heard the news. How's she doing, son?" I sat frozen, staring at them, feeling the blood in my veins boil. The bills flashed vividly in my mind. The travel brochures, the Louis Vuitton bag, the Rolex watch. They had just returned from Europe, from days sipping wine and flaunting their extravagance, while my grandmother lay here fighting for her life. And now they stood here, pretending to care as if they hadn't abandoned her. I gripped my grandmother's hand tightly, trying to stay calm, but my voice trembled as I spoke. "Where have you been that you're only showing up now?" Grandma was lying here with no one to care for her except me. If I hadn't ended my business trip early, would you have left her to fight this illness alone? My mother blinked, her smile faltering. "Oh, Austin, don't say that. We had some business to take care of, but we're here now." She glanced at my father as if seeking his support. My father cleared his throat, his tone still confident. "Exactly, son. We had a short business trip abroad, very important, but she's fine now, right? You've got everything under control." I felt anger flare up like a fire, burning away every ounce of restraint. "Business?" I repeated, my voice cold. "Business in Paris? With designer bags and expensive wine? Or did you forget that Grandma was lying here alone while you spent the money I sent for her care?" The air in the room grew heavy. Miranda, who was checking the machines in the corner, paused, her sharp eyes fixed on my parents. Dr. Carter, who had just entered to check on my grandmother, froze, his hand gripping the chart. An elderly patient in the next bed, an old man named Henry, sat up, looking at us with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. My mother's face paled and she forced a weak smile. "Austin, what are you talking about? We would never do that. Don't misunderstand us." But her voice trembled, lacking its earlier confidence. My father frowned, his tone harsh. "Son, don't talk nonsense. We've done everything for this family. What kind of people do you think we are?" I stood up, facing them, my hands clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. "What kind of people?" I growled, each word bursting from my chest. "The kind of people who abandon their own mother, my grandmother, to go on a European vacation with the money I sent for her. I've seen everything. Did you think I was blind?" I pulled the receipts from my pocket and threw them on the floor between us. The papers fell, undeniable evidence of their betrayal. My mother stepped back, covering her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. My father froze, his face red, but he couldn't say a word. Miranda stepped forward, picked up one of the receipts, scanned it, and looked at my parents with contempt. "Is this why Mrs. Lois was here alone for 5 days?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp as a knife. Dr. Carter shook his head, his expression full of disappointment. "I've worked here for 20 years and I've never seen family members act like this," he said, his voice low but heavy. Mr. Henry, the patient next to us, cleared his throat and added, "I heard them bragging about their Paris trip right when Mrs. Lois was admitted. Absolutely shameful." The room felt taut, like a stretched string. Every pair of eyes was fixed on my parents, as if they were standing trial in a public courtroom. My mother began to cry, but I felt no pity anymore. "Austin, I'm sorry. I didn't think Grandma would—" She stammered, but I cut her off. "Didn't think what? That she'd survive? That she'd be alone? Did you spare a single thought for her while you were spending that money? Or did you think she wouldn't make it through this crisis, so you decided to abandon her here?" My father tried to interject, his voice weak. "Son, we just wanted to live a little better." You make good money, we thought. But he stopped, perhaps realizing his excuses only made things worse. I turned back to my grandmother, taking her hand, feeling the faint warmth from her frail fingers. She looked at me, her eyes misty, but I knew she understood what was happening. "Grandma, I'm here," I whispered, fighting back tears. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." The people in the room, Miranda, Dr. Carter, Mr. Henry, looked at me with respect mixed with sympathy. They had witnessed everything, and I knew if needed they would stand up to testify to the truth. But at that moment, all I wanted was to protect my grandmother, to shield her from the pain caused by her own son and daughter-in-law. The minutes following the confrontation with my parents, the atmosphere in the ICU remained heavy, as if a storm had just passed through. My father, Fred, stood in the corner of the room, hands in his pockets, his face flushed, avoiding everyone's gaze. My mother, Carol, sat on a plastic chair, her hands covering her face, her shoulders trembling as if she were crying. But I no longer felt any pity. The receipts lay scattered on the floor like fragments of the trust I had once placed in them. The truth had to be revealed, not just for me, but for her, the woman who had sacrificed her entire life for this family. My grandmother, though weak, seemed to sense the tension in the air. Her eyes, though tired, began to move, shifting from me to my parents. I noticed a strange glint in her gaze, not the fragility of someone who had just escaped the brink of death, but the resilience I remembered from the days when she tirelessly worked the markets to provide for the family. "Austin," she whispered, her voice hoarse and faint, so soft I had to lean in close to hear. "I need to speak." I gripped her hand tightly, my heart pounding. "Grandma, please rest, don't strain yourself," I said, worried she'd exhaust herself. But she shook her head slightly, a small but determined gesture. "No, I have to speak. Now." Miranda, standing nearby, quickly stepped forward to check the readings on the machines. "Mrs. Lois, you need to conserve your strength," she said, her voice gentle but concerned. But my grandmother, with a strength I hadn't expected, squeezed my hand lightly, her eyes locking onto mine. "Call everyone over here," she said, her voice weak but carrying an undeniable resolve. I looked around and saw Dr. Carter standing at the door, Mr. Henry sitting up in the bed next to us, and a few other nurses who had curiously entered after hearing the commotion from the earlier confrontation. My parents stood there, awkward, as if they wanted to flee but couldn't. I nodded, stood up, and called everyone closer. "Grandma wants to say something," I said, my voice trembling, unsure of what was about to happen. Miranda pulled a chair for Dr. Carter, while Mr. Henry, though frail, sat up straighter, his eyes curious. My father cleared his throat, trying to regain his confidence. "Mom, you should rest, don't do anything stressful." But my grandmother looked at him, her gaze icy, and I recognized it as the look of a deeply disappointed mother. "Fred," she said, her voice weak but clear, "be quiet." It's time I spoke the truth. The room fell silent, with only the steady beeping of the monitor breaking the stillness. I held my grandmother's frail hand tightly, feeling the faint warmth that gave me strength. She took a labored breath, then spoke in a trembling but resolute voice. "For decades, I worked, traded, saved, not just to provide for the family. I also built a portfolio of properties, apartments, small shops in Beaumont, in Houston. I never told anyone, intending it to be a gift for my children and grandchildren before I passed. But today, I'm forced to reveal this truth." She paused, her breathing heavy, but her eyes never left mine. I stood frozen, my heart racing. Properties? The grandmother I always thought was just a small-time trader owned a substantial estate? My father, cowering in the corner, suddenly blurted out, his voice shaking with shock. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "Properties. Why didn't you ever tell me?" My mother looked up, her eyes wide, her lips trembling but unable to speak. My grandmother shook her head slightly, her pained gaze shifting to my father. "Fred, you didn't need to know." I had already prepared a will, planning to divide everything equally between you and Austin. But after this—" She paused, taking a breath, her voice faint but sharp as a blade. "I've seen clearly who truly stood by me, who truly loved me, and I know it's only Austin, my grandson." My throat tightened, tears welling up. "Grandma," I could only whisper. She squeezed my hand, her eyes gleaming with a final spark. "I've decided to revise my will. All my assets. I'm leaving to you, Austin. You deserve it. You're the one who stayed here, cared for me, when my son and daughter-in-law only knew how to spend and abandon me when I needed them most." Then she turned to my parents. It was no longer the look of a mother, but a cold, judgmental stare. "Fred, Carol, you chose money, you chose extravagance over me, and now you will receive nothing from me." The room erupted in stunned silence. My father's face paled, his mouth opening but no words coming out. My mother burst into tears, real tears this time. But I knew they were born of shame, fear, and regret over losing the inheritance, not remorse. Miranda, standing beside me, gripped my hand, her eyes shining with respect. "Mrs. Lois, you're so strong," she said, her voice trembling. Dr. Carter nodded, his voice low. "I'll bear witness to this declaration if needed. This is a just decision." Mr. Henry, the patient next to us, clapped lightly, his hoarse voice full of emotion. "Young man, you deserve it. As for those two, utterly shameful." The people in the room, nurses, doctor, patients, began to clap, a small but meaningful round of applause like an affirmation of justice. I looked at my grandmother, tears streaming down my face. "Grandma, I don't need the assets. I just need you," I said, my voice choking. But she smiled, a faint but loving smile. "Austin, I know. But this is how I protect you. You're entirely deserving." She closed her eyes, exhausted, but I knew she had said what needed to be said. My parents stood there, silent, unable to lift their heads. My father, who always prided himself on being the pillar of the family, now bowed his head, his hands trembling. My mother, in her sparkling dress and gold bracelet, looked utterly out of place in the ICU. They said nothing more, no excuses, no apologies. They knew every pair of eyes in the room was judging them, and no words could erase the truth. In the days that followed, I lived in a small world where it was just my grandmother and me. I stayed at the hospital from morning till night, never leaving her side. Each day I wiped her face with a warm cloth, folded the green woolen blanket she loved, and read the Bible passages she often listened to. I recounted old memories, the afternoons when she took me to the market, the times she taught me how to tie my shoelaces, or her radiant smile when I graduated from college. I hoped my voice, though hoarse from exhaustion, could bring her some comfort. My grandmother, though weak, occasionally responded with a gentle squeeze of my hand or a faint smile. Those small moments, however fleeting, were the fragile rays of hope that kept me standing. But that hope didn't last. A few days later, Dr. Paul Carter entered the ICU, his expression heavier than usual. He pulled me aside to a corner, his voice low but clear. "Austin, we need to talk," he began, holding the chart. "Mrs. Lois's condition is stable for now, but it's very fragile. The stroke caused severe damage, and she's facing multiple potential complications. Heart failure, respiratory failure, even pneumonia. These could strike at any moment. You need to prepare yourself." I stared at him, my heart burning with anguish. She just woke up a few days ago. She even announced she was changing her will. You saw that, didn't you? Shouldn't she be getting better? What do you mean, prepare myself? Are you saying this is all just temporary? My voice broke, filled with anger and despair. Dr. Carter sighed, his eyes reflecting empathy. He showed me the chart, his voice patient but firm. "Austin, what you saw, her waking up speaking, is a good sign. But for an elderly patient with a severe stroke, it's often just a temporary period of lucidity. Internally, her body is still struggling against multiple complications. A weakened heart, lungs prone to infection, unstable brain pressure. These could escalate at any time. That's why I'm asking you to prepare." I froze, my heart pounding erratically, my throat tight. No way. I'm not ready to lose her. She's my entire childhood, my whole life, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Dr. Carter placed a hand on my shoulder, his gaze steady but filled with compassion. "We're still doing everything we can, but her age and frail body mean our efforts can only buy a little more time. The most important thing now is that you stay by her side so she doesn't feel alone." His words cut into my heart like a knife. I returned to my grandmother's side, took her hand and forced a smile despite the tears threatening to spill. "Grandma, you're so strong," I whispered. "You'll pull through, right?" But she only looked at me, her eyes dimming, as if she knew something I wasn't ready to accept. I sat there hour after hour, holding her hand tightly as if letting go would mean losing her forever. As Dr. Carter had predicted, my grandmother's health began to decline. Her breathing grew more labored, each breath a painful effort. The ventilator beeped steadily, but I could see the life in her fading. I didn't leave her, not for a second. Nurse Miranda, with her familiar gentleness, checked on her often, sometimes holding my hand to comfort me. "You're doing everything you can, Austin," she said. "She feels your love." I nodded, but inside I wanted to scream that my love wasn't enough, that I couldn't stop time. 3 days after my conversation with Dr. Carter, as the sunset filtered through the hospital window, casting a soft golden light on my grandmother's face, I sat by her side, reading her favorite Bible passage. My voice was hoarse, but I didn't stop. She looked at me, and for the first time in days she smiled, a weak but radiant smile, like the final flicker of a lamp about to go out. She squeezed my hand lightly but firmly and whispered, "Austin, you're my pride." I broke down in tears. But she only smiled, her eyes shining one last time before slowly closing. Her breathing slowed, then stopped. The machine's beeping became a long, cold flatline. I held her, pressing my face to her shoulder, crying like a child. "Grandma, don't leave me," I whispered, but I knew she was gone. Peacefully in my arms, with her final smile meant for me. Miranda entered, her eyes red, but she said nothing, only placing a hand on my shoulder. Dr. Carter came in, performed a final check, and quietly said, "I'm sorry, Austin." She passed peacefully. I don't clearly remember the hours that followed. I only know I sat there, holding her hand, until the nurses gently pulled me away. I felt as though a part of my heart had been torn apart, but at the same time, I knew she was no longer in pain. She had left with my love, and that was the only comfort I could cling to. I arranged her funeral with all the reverence I could muster. I chose a small funeral home in Beaumont where she used to attend church services. I personally prepared everything from the simple yet elegant oak coffin to the wildflowers she loved. I wanted her funeral to be more than a farewell. I wanted it to be a tribute to her life, a resilient, loving, and sacrificial woman. Neighbors in Beaumont, including Mrs. Hattie, and old acquaintances of hers attended, all moved when they heard the story of my devotion. "You were Lois's pride," Mrs. Hattie said, hugging me tightly, tears streaming down her face. "She's surely smiling in heaven." The Beaumont community, though small, gathered to bid her farewell. They shared stories about her, how she helped neighbors in tough times, how she always smiled despite life's hardships. I stood there listening to every word, both proud and heartbroken. She deserved to be loved, to be cherished, and I only wished I had done more for her while she was alive. My parents appeared at the funeral but stood at a distance, silent, not daring to approach me or her coffin. Those who had witnessed her will declaration, Miranda, Dr. Carter, Mr. Henry, were also present. They looked at my parents with no trace of sympathy. I knew they would testify if needed to ensure her will was honored. But my parents didn't dare challenge it. They knew they had lost not just the inheritance, but their self-respect. Shame clung to them like an inescapable shadow. I said nothing to them, not because I forgave them, but because I didn't want to taint her funeral with bitter words. As her coffin was lowered, I stood there, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, tears falling silently. "Grandma, I'll live in a way that honors you," I whispered. I knew she was gone, but her love, her legacy would remain with me forever, and I would never let the truth about her, about what she had done, fade into oblivion. In the days following the funeral, I returned to Houston, but I was no longer the Austin who rushed through business trips on oil rigs. I carried a new responsibility, not just the material legacy my grandmother left behind, but also the promise I had made to her, to live in a way that honored her love and sacrifice. The portfolio of properties she revealed in her final declaration, small apartments and modest shops scattered across Beaumont and Houston, now belonged to me. But to me, they were more than just numbers on paper or a bank account. Each house, each shop was a piece of her memory, a testament to the resilience of a woman who quietly built a fortune to protect future generations. I began managing her estate with care and reverence. I visited each apartment, each shop, and met the tenants, people she had quietly helped for years. An elderly woman, the owner of a small flower shop in Beaumont, told me that my grandmother had lowered her rent when her business struggled. "Lois was the kindest person I ever met," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "She wasn't just a landlord, she was a benefactor." Another tenant, a young man running an auto repair shop in Houston, shared how she had let him pay rent late so he could support his young child. These stories filled me with both pride and heartache. She had done all of this in silence, without boasting, without needing anyone to know. And I, the grandson she loved most, had been completely unaware of it until she was gone. I spent hours organizing documents, working with a lawyer to finalize the transfer of her will. Mrs. Hattie, her close neighbor, had been the one safeguarding my grandmother's paperwork. Each time I opened a file, I uncovered fragments of her life. A handwritten letter from her youth, a photo of her standing in front of her first grocery store, and small notes about helping others. I sat in her old house with its weathered tile roof, reading her words, and felt as though she was still there, watching over me. "Grandma, I won't let you down," I murmured, gently tracing my fingers over a photo of her smiling brightly beside me on my graduation day. My parents, after the funeral, all but disappeared from my life. They didn't call, didn't visit, and I didn't reach out either. I knew they were living in shame, and I had no intention of forgiving them. Not because I wanted to hold on to bitterness, but because I couldn't forget the days my grandmother lay alone in the ICU while they sipped wine in Paris. Once Mrs. Hattie told me that my mother had visited her, trying to ask about my grandmother's will, but Mrs. Hattie had responded coldly, "Ask Austin. He's the one who deserves it." Hearing that lightened my heart, not because I had gained the estate, but because the truth had been acknowledged. My parents, with all their boasting and pretense, now faced the consequences of their selfishness, not only losing the inheritance, but also the respect and regard of the community. I didn't see managing my grandmother's estate as a material victory. To me, it was a spiritual legacy, a testament to filial piety, truth, and justice for those who deserve it. Each month, I set aside a portion of the estate's income to help struggling tenants, just as she had done. I established a small fund in her name to support lonely elderly people in Beaumont, so they wouldn't have to endure the isolation she had faced. Every time I signed a check for the fund, I felt her smiling somewhere, pleased with how I was carrying on her legacy. One afternoon, I returned to Beaumont and stood in front of her old house. The porch, filled with wildflowers, was just as it had always been, but now it held new meaning. I placed a bouquet of wildflowers at the door, a silent tribute. "Grandma, I'm doing the right thing, aren't I?" I whispered, looking up at the clear blue sky. I didn't hear a reply, but in my heart I knew she was there, in every gentle breeze, in every beautiful memory she left behind. My life went on, but it was no longer the same. I still went out to the oil rigs, still faced the sea winds and rough waves, but in my heart I had a new compass. My grandmother left me not just properties, but a spiritual legacy. Filial piety, truth, and love. Those were the priceless treasures, far beyond any amount of money or luxury goods. I came to understand that in life, greed and deceit may triumph momentarily, but in the end, only truth endures. And filial piety, the sincere love for family, will always prevail over selfish schemes. That was the lesson she imparted and the promise I would carry for the rest of my life. To live in a way that honors her love, to prove that filial piety and truth will always triumph over greed and deceit.